Well, hello, my name is Dr. Jorge Sanchez. Welcome to my show today, Ask a Doc podcast, where I ask the questions that you care about regarding various different types of medical conditions and questions that you might have. And so send them my way. I do use an app called Medici. You can download it on your Play Store. It's called Medici, and you can search me by my last name. Sanchez, first name's Jorge, and through there you can ask me medical questions that I could talk about through this podcast. And so today's topics we're going to talk about is going to be coronavirus symptoms. When should I be concerned? What are the symptoms of coronavirus? What are the complications? Is it that bad? Along with, so we're going to talk about as well as vaccines. We don't have the coronavirus vaccine as of yet, but we're going to talk about the flu vaccine. And so with the symptoms of coronavirus. So let me start off by saying that this has been a learning process and has been a learning process for everyone. I think that the assumption was that physicians kind of knew what the symptoms were, but we were all learning about this. We were and we had no experience in the beginning as to what it looked like and how did people behave. Was it like the flu? Was it not like the flu? Was it like the common cold? Was it not like the common cold? And so it was, to say the least, it was just a big mess. We didn't have appropriate guidelines. I would think that the CDC, they were kind of learning along the way also, and mistakes were made, but we are actually learning much more now and have some experience with this. This is already August 14th of 2020. And so we know more. So now, what I could say about the symptoms of coronavirus is that there's not one single symptom that will say yes or no about having coronavirus. And there are many people who will say, well, I don't think I have it, and because it's X, Y, and Z, and they give their reasons as to why they don't think they have coronavirus. And they went online and they definitely don't have coronavirus. This is just allergies. I get allergies like this every year. Or another one is that I get sinus stuff every year, and this is the same. I know it's not coronavirus. I absolutely do. I don't believe it's coronavirus. And then they end up having coronavirus. End up being positive. And I'm sorry, but this is kind of a new situation for all of us, and that most people with any kind of symptom that mimics upper respiratory illnesses or mimics a flu is basically suspect of potentially having coronavirus. So in part because the symptoms for allergies are going to be runny nose and cough. May not necessarily feel sick per se, but they'll have runny nose, maybe some clear drainage. And people with viral illnesses, they'll have colorful drainage, right? And they'll have green snot but unfortunately, that these symptoms are exactly the same as coronavirus. The difference is that with allergies, it kind of gets better with and as well as with upper respiratory illnesses that are common. The difference is that with coronavirus, there is a chance of progressing into some serious complications, so there is, sadly, there's not a single symptom that you can hang your hat on and say, well, I definitely don't have it, and this is why. That doesn't fly anymore, sadly. So let's go over some of the symptoms, and that can help guide you as to if you might have coronavirus. And so the most somewhat reliable symptom for coronavirus is going to be a fever. And fever is going to be not like using the back of your hand and measuring it on your forehead and saying oh, I have a fever. That doesn't count. You have to have a thermometer. Hopefully you already have one, and because it's been difficult getting a thermometer now these days because they've been flying off the shelf. But having a thermometer and measuring it and having it as above 100.4 is going to be considered a fever. And about 43% of those who have coronavirus, about half, interestingly, half of people actually develop a fever. So now, because during the summer, there's not a whole lot of things that can cause fevers. Yes, you have like the random off things that can occur, but for the most part, the common things that cause fevers are not around during the August period. So upper respiratory illnesses, typical viruses that can cause just regular benign cough and colds, those were gone back in March or April, and so we haven't had those in quite a while. And so the things that are causing fever these days are generally going to be, sadly, coronavirus. So now another symptom, so cough. About 50% will develop cough, and the rest is just a myriad of things. So muscle aches, headache, difficulty breathing, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. 20% can have a sore throat. And even like diarrhea and nausea and vomiting, which was interesting because like previously we had believed that was not a symptom typical of coronavirus, but as we've learned, about 20% of the people actually can develop diarrhea as a consequence of coronavirus. Another one that's interesting is going to be a lack of smell, some abdominal pain potentially, and then lastly, runny nose. And so there are people who like don't have symptoms at all, and the only way they know that they have it is going to be because they were exposed by a known documented case, and they live with somebody and they get tested and they end up having coronavirus, being positive. And those people who are asymptomatic and don't have any symptoms either are pre-symptomatic, meaning that they're just days away from getting it and actually having symptoms, or they just don't have any symptoms at all. And the sad part is that during this asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic period, they are actually quite contagious and can spread it because they're walking around, going to work, and may not necessarily be as careful. And that's how it's spreading, is that people are just not careful. They don't take it seriously. They're not wearing their mask. They're like, I feel fine. I don't see why I have to wear a mask. And they're spreading the illness because this illness spreads when you feel fine. And in fact, what I've read is that you are the most contagious when before you develop any symptoms. A day before you develop symptoms, you are actually the most contagious and you feel fine. And it is the hardest thing for people to kind of wrap their mind around, of saying that like, I need to wear a mask at all times because I want to protect the general public and in the event that I might have coronavirus. And so now, so what's the time period like when from date of exposure or time of exposure to the onset of symptoms? So typically what you hear a lot is 14 days is kind of like you're in the clear, like at from date of exposure to 14 days out. At that point, if you have not developed symptoms, you're in the clear. So that's the spectrum, that's the spread. But the average, because it is kind of a bell curve, the average time of onset of symptoms is going to be 5 days, somewhere between 4 to 5 from getting exposed, and then like 4 to 5 days later, then having the symptoms. That's going to be the kind of the average. But the spread, or as far as like how long is going to be until afterwards, you're going to say you're in the clear, is going to be 14 days. And so if you have if you've come in contact with somebody with a known documented case and you were exposed, then you're going to have to be quarantined. And the best way to do it is to be quarantined for 14 days. You can't necessarily rely on testing because testing could be potentially negative initially. The other thing is about like complications. So like the complications can include like pneumonia, and that is when somebody really needs to go to the hospital. Obviously, seek medical care and just call beforehand to your doctor's office if you think you might have coronavirus. Like if you have a fever, you have any of these symptoms, just call the clinic and say, hey, how do you handle patients that have these symptoms? What do I need to do? Should I get tested? Should I not get tested? But reasons to go to the emergency room, it's going to be simply shortness of breath, and because that could be a symptom of pneumonia due to coronavirus. So typically the story is going to end up starting off with feeling tired, feeling achy, I have fevers, but I can breathe fine. But then they start having difficulty breathing, and difficulty breathing is a symptom that is a little bit hard to understand. It's going to be it's not like I have a hard time breathing through my nose. It's not like I have a hard time taking a deep breath. It's really going to be like I'm having labored breathing with minimal exertion. I'm short of breath when I walk. And so appropriate shortness of breath is going to be like when you exercise. When you go for a 2-mile jog and you're like rapidly breathing, that's normal. That's good for you. But if that level of breathing at that speed occurs through really just walking from your bedroom to the bathroom, or going to your car and you're struggling to breathe to that degree, then that is what it feels like to have labored breathing, and a reason to go to the emergency room, because pneumonia is the serious complication that can occur from coronavirus. Because they'll have to measure your oxygen level, and if your oxygen saturations, when they put the little monitor on your finger with the little red lights, and if it's measuring low, then that's going to be kind of a marker of like, hey, this could be bad. And they'll do a chest X-ray, maybe they'll do a CT scan of the chest, depending on what's going on, and they'll have to keep a close eye on you, because at that point, some of these people go into respiratory failure to where their breathing is so difficult that they could potentially stop breathing, and that's how people die from coronavirus. And so they'll end up being on a breathing machine, etc., that can actually save their lives. And so that's the symptom of that. And then for next time, I'm gonna have to cut it short today. But on our next visit, hopefully we get to have a chance to talk about the influenza vaccine. I'll briefly say that we really need to get the vaccine to people for influenza, because to have an infection of both coronavirus and influenza, if you were to get sick with both at the same time, then I guarantee you that the mortality rate will be much higher. And the nightmare situation that we have all worried about will come if this influenza season is particularly bad. And so the best way to get to prevent that is by getting your vaccine for the flu. And I know a lot of people will say that they've never gotten the flu, so knock on wood. I'm like, hey, there ain't no wood. Sorry. The wood is gone. You can't be knocking on, and the wood's fake anyway, all right? So don't be knocking on wood anymore, because we can't afford to do that. This is not something that we should be like, well, I'm just going to risk it. Ain't no risk in this, okay? Because this is a matter of life and death, okay? Another thing about the flu is that people say, well, I get sick from the flu, so I don't want to get that. I guarantee you do not get sick from the flu, right? Well, I got sick one time and it was really bad. I'm like, look, where do people go when they get sick? Well, they go to the doctor's office. Say that in cough and cold season, in January and February, they go to the doctor's office. And so I'm like, okay, where do you get the vaccine for the flu? At the doctor's office. So did the flu give you the flu shot? The flu shot, I misspoke. Where do you go to get the flu shot? Sorry. You go to the doctor's office. So did the flu shot give you the flu, or did somebody in the office who was sick give you the flu? Or they gave you a cough and cold because you shook somebody's hand or you touched a doorknob. It's not the flu vaccine. It's the doctor's office. It's the doorknobs. It's the people there they don't cover their mouths when they're coughing. That is how you get sick from the flu shot, because it's got nothing to do with the flu shot. It has everything to do with where you get your flu shots. And so, and particularly if you get your flu shot like in January and February, which is like the peak like flu season, right? And peak also in terms of like regular cough and cold viruses. So if you get your flu vaccine in October, and you like see the signs at the pharmacy, and you see the sign saying, "Hey, get your flu vaccine," and you get it immediately, I promise you that you're not going to get sick from the flu shots. And now it's another thing if you just don't like shots, and I mean I don't like shots either, but I get it because it's the right thing to do, and because here's another thing. A lot of people say, well, who knows if the flu shot's going to work at all? I heard it was only 20% effective from last year. And I'm like, okay, so you want to take the 0% alternative, which is not getting the vaccine, because, like that makes a lot of sense, right? You decided to say, you know what, I'm just going to not get the vaccine and go with the 0% effective rather than go with the 20% effective. But even aside from that, if, say that somebody says like, well, I just want to I'm worried about dying from influenza, because most people didn't know prior to coronavirus that influenza can actually cause death. I mean, most people were unaware of that. I think like 3 years ago, we had a really bad flu season where 50,000 people died. And so the vaccine, it doesn't really do a great job with like preventing people from getting the flu. What it does do is that it keeps you from dying from the flu. It keeps you from developing flu pneumonia. And also, it shortens the duration of illness from 14 days of influenza to 7 days. So that's a good deal if you understood that that's what it did. But if you weren't taught that, then like you're like, man, I got a bad deal. I got flu for 7 days. Why did I even get the flu vaccine? Well, because if you didn't, you would have had it for 14 days. And so aside from all that, right, aside from the fact that influenza vaccine can save lives and prevent people from being hospitalized, it also it's a nice thing to be kind to your hospital. Your hospital cannot handle both COVID pneumonia patients and influenza pneumonia patients. We can't handle that. I mean, we've had problems in the past before with hospitals being almost at capacity, and that's with like the normal flu season. Can you imagine having coronavirus and influenza? Like we can't handle that, to the point where hospitals will say, hey, effectively we're shut down. And if you are having like an emergency appendicitis, or if you're having like a bad migraine where you like throwing up and you need to go to the hospital, or say you got your finger chopped off because you were like, here, hold my beer and watch this. Well, I'm sorry. I'm going to say, sorry, you can't come in because like the hospital is like de facto like not functional. Why? Because we were not being kind and by our hospital systems by taking on our own responsibility of like, doing all of it, right? Like washing hands, face masks, 6 feet distance, and also getting our flu vaccine whenever it comes. All right. Well, hey, y'all have a fantastic day, and hopefully this was entertaining. And send me ideas, send me questions that y'all have about just medical stuff, and hopefully I get to hear from you guys. Y'all have a fantastic day.